Welcome to Casa Academy Chapter 3, Part 1, where we will cover real estate license law and commission rules. Today, we're really zooming out, We're taking a look at the big picture of Florida's regulatory ecosystem. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly who makes the rules, who enforces them, and, most importantly, what you need to do to keep your license active and totally out of trouble, well, you're in the exact right place.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for our session today. First up, we'll establish the regulatory framework. Next, we'll meet the Commission, unpack FREC's 4 key powers, check out your license statuses, and finally, we'll hammer down those all-important deadlines and license types. Mentally prepare yourselves. This is basically your top-down breakdown of the absolute must-know rules you need to memorize.
Let's start right at the macro level. The overarching umbrella for all of this is the DBPR. That's the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, or you'll often hear it simply called the Department. This is a massive state agency, and their absolute primary mission is to protect the public. They regulate pretty much everything, from barbers to accountants, and yes, of course, real estate professionals. They hold this incredibly broad authority to issue and renew licenses, hand down cease and desist orders, and adopt the rules necessary to actually implement Florida's licensing laws.
Now, let's zoom in just a little bit. Because the DBPR is so unbelievably massive and regulates so many different professions, it has to operate through various divisions to actually get anything done. For us, that's the Division of Real Estate, or the DRE. Basically, think of the DRE as the specific administrative and clerical support wing that is entirely dedicated to real estate regulation. They're the ones actually processing the paperwork behind the scenes.
Building on that administration, we have the Florida Real Estate Commission. Most people just call it FREC, and FREC is the entity that actually oversees most real estate regulatory activities. Listen, if you only remember one single acronym for your exam today, make it FREC. They are the true rule makers governing your day-to-day operations as a real estate professional.
So FREC is a 7-member commission, and this brilliantly illustrates how incredibly intentional its composition is. 4 of those members must be active brokers who have at least 5 years of active experience. Then, 1 member is either a broker or a sales associate, but they need at least 2 years of experience. But notice those 2 consumer members? They're also known as lay members. These 2 individuals are not real estate licensees at all. Actually, they sit on the commission specifically to ensure that the public's interests are fiercely represented in every single decision FREC makes.
Now, there are some specific numbers regarding FREC's members that are absolutely critical flashcard facts for your exam. First, they're appointed directly by the governor and then confirmed by the Florida Senate. They serve 4-year terms, and they can serve a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. Oh, and here's a very specific, quirky detail you might easily get tested on. At least one of these 7 members must be 60 years of age or older. Keep that one in your back pocket. All right, let's look at what FREC actually does. They have 4 primary categories of duties and powers. And honestly, leaning into a government branch analogy is the absolute best way to make sense of them. First up, executive powers. Think things like publishing educational materials and investigating complaints. Second, we have quasi-legislative powers, which involves adopting administrative rules to clarify laws. And before we move on to the next power, your verification code is 659888. Third, we have quasi-judicial powers, which is all about imposing administrative penalties. And finally, ministerial powers. This is basically the record-keeping and processing done by the DRE on FREC's behalf, mostly because FREC doesn't have its own staff and usually only meets once a month to get things done.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how FREC's quasi-legislative power applies directly to you right now. You see, the Florida legislature passed a law requiring you to take a licensing exam. That's a fact. But FREC uses its quasi-legislative power to pass the administrative rule determining exactly what a passing grade on that exam is. And, as you probably know, that number is 75%. It is way easier to change an administrative rule than to pass a whole new state law, which is exactly why FREC is tasked with handling these specific, granular implementation details.
We also need to carefully contrast that legislative rulemaking with FREC's quasi-judicial powers. When a licensee breaks the rules, FREC acts a little bit like a court, but with some strict limits. They can impose severe, career-ending administrative penalties. We're talking fines, probation, suspension, and even full revocation of your real estate license. However, and this is a vital distinction you must remember, unlike an actual court, FREC absolutely does not have the authority to impose criminal penalties or jail sentences.
Okay, let's shift our focus down to the individual level, your actual physical real estate license. There are generally 3 life cycle events handled by the department. Step 1 is your initial issue, which happens when you become licensed for the very first time. Exciting stuff. Step 2 is renewal, which is simply how you maintain that license going forward. And Step 3 is a reissue. That simply happens if you, say, accidentally lose your physical license and just need to request a replacement.
But look, simply having a piece of paper doesn't mean you can instantly go sell a house. So the crucial point is understanding your exact license status. You absolutely must be active, meaning properly registered with an employer and totally current on your fees to actually earn compensation. But what if you aren't? Well, we have two other statuses, voluntarily inactive and involuntarily inactive. Voluntarily inactive means you're perfectly compliant with all the rules, you're paying your fees, but you've just chosen to indefinitely take a break from practicing. Involuntarily inactive, on the other hand, that means your license is expired because you forgot to take your required education or you failed to pay your renewal fees. And listen to me carefully on this one. You do not want to stay involuntarily inactive. If you're involuntarily inactive for up to 2 years, you are living right in the danger zone. After that 2-year period passes, boom, your license becomes completely null and void. It is dead. You would literally have to start the entire real estate licensing process over from the very beginning.
Speaking of keeping your license alive and avoiding that danger zone entirely, there is one massive number you need to memorize right now: 45. This represents the single most important deadline for new sales associates, your 45-hour post-license education course.
I really need to stress this with absolute maximum energy. Before the expiration of your initial sales associate license, you must complete this 45-hour post-license course. If you fail to complete this requirement before the expiration date, your license becomes null and void. There is absolutely no grace period for this requirement. None whatsoever. Missing this deadline means you lose your license completely and you're starting all over again. Unless, of course, you just really love paying application fees twice.
Finally, before we wrap up this section, let's contrast two unique license exceptions so you definitely do not confuse them on the exam. Normally, a sales associate can only have one registered employer at a time. Makes sense, right? But a group license allows a sales associate who works for an owner-developer to operate under a single license while selling properties for a group of interrelated companies. Contrast that with multiple licenses, which is an option exclusively reserved for brokers. This allows a broker to manage multiple completely different real estate companies simultaneously, as long as doing so doesn't create a conflict of interest or cause any harm to the public.
This brings us to a final thought for today's lesson. We've talked about all these rules, these structures, boards, and incredibly strict deadlines, but let's bring it right back to the core mission. If the ultimate goal of Florida's entire regulatory system, from the DBPR all the way down to FREC, is to protect the public, how does maintaining an active, well-educated license protect your future clients? Really think about that. Staying on top of your post-license education and your compliance isn't just about passing a test or avoiding some fines. It is literally the very foundation of building public trust in this profession. Keep that in mind as you study those flashcards, and I will see you in the next lesson.